You sound like you still have a cold or
Oh, I'm
allergies.
sick. Yeah, I haven't been this sick in a couple of years, and it's amazing. Yeah, it's just, I mean, yeah. So it's not COVID. It's just a terrible, terrible head and chest cold. But yeah, it's been pretty unfortunate. I've been in bed for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and I got up today. I actually went out and saw a doctor and had another PCR test, and came home and sat in front of my computer for a few hours, and I'm now on the couch because I didn't feel like I could sit upright anymore. And sorry, it's just started pouring here as well, so
Hmm.
I don't know if you can hear that, but yeah,
I
it's...
cannot hear it. I can see your window. It actually looks like a bright sunny day out there, but in the
Well, it's kind of, yeah, bright, but no, it's raining. It's a lot of
yeah,
rain.
it's cloudy here, and the sun is going down because it's evening time, and I've got allergies. This is spring fever in this part of the world, and
Oh, yeah. Well, we're just getting the beginning of the flu season here, so,
yeah.
yep.
So this is going to be our fifth crack at this. Is that?
Is that right? Is that where we're up to? The fifth time?
I'm not 100%
Probably.
sure, but
This
I think
notebook. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. This is no. This is just 4.
just four. This is fourth.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you have comments or questions or whatever about this? And
Well, I was reviewing my beeps, feeling disappointed by them because I find none of them to be particularly interesting. Um, and I find so this device is, I know it is quite small, but it's not. It's I find it. I think if it were less clunky and the whole mechanism were a bit easier, I would probably be capturing more beeps and better beeps if it was easier to sort of have on. And yeah, I don't know, like even if there was a way that you could hack the iPhone, because I'm quite happy wearing these for long periods of time and don't find them. Whereas the one with the cord, it's all, and it's a long cord and I find it keeps getting tangled. And often, being a woman, I'm not wearing pants with a belt that make this easy to kind of... and so, yeah, it can be a bit obtrusive. And so then I'm only really wearing it at home. And whereas I think if you could hack the iPhone to deliver the random beeps through the earpods, that would facilitate me wearing it more and in different situations.
so Apple makes that difficult. I have an app which I don't think is very good actually, but it's as good as there is out there.
Yeah.
If we really wanted to do it without using the regular beeper, the best way that I found hacking the iPhone, as you call it, is to use the alarm and actually
Oh, yeah.
physically program in alarms. So what I generally do is to ask you to have your partner. I set up a schedule of alarm times or whatever, and have your partner or somebody else put those times in, so you don't know when the times are going to be. And
That's a good
then
idea.
and then I give you a recording of a 700 hertz beep, like the DES beeper beep, and you put that
Yep.
in like it was a song, as if you were going to. So there's a fair amount of work that is involved, and
Yeah.
the advantage of that is that you can play it across your earpods. But
Yeah.
the disadvantage is that well, it depends on the earpods, but a lot of Bluetooth stuff doesn't happen immediately. So so I don't use it. For example, in this interview right now, I don't in the kind of interviewing that I do, I don't like to use I have wireless Bluetooth earpods, and I don't use them because I miss the beginning of every sentence.
Oh, yeah.
When
Yeah,
it goes back and forth, and that disturbs me. I like to hear the whole thing, I guess, and so I prefer a wired earphone.
yeah.
But
Yeah. The Bluetooth can be, a little bit
it is the
unreliable.
case that it would be possible for me to make the whole device the whole beeper is a really simple thing, and it could be if I had the money and the whatever, I could tell somebody to make me something that looks like your earpod, and
Yeah.
all it is a beeper.
And that's it. Yeah. So you wouldn't need anything
You wouldn't
big
need-
and heavy
you-
like this.
Yeah, and that could be done. I've not done it, but could be nowadays.
Yeah. I'm sure.
There's a lot of things that you could do. You can't do.
With
Can't do 'em all.
limitless resources. Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. How often are you doing these, like these sessions, and how many different subjects and that kind of thing?
Well, it depends on how you count. I think in terms of what I've been putting on the web, I think you're the fourth one, and I've got 2 more going.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that might be enough of that exercise. I haven't exactly figured out what to do about that. So, I have a new wrinkle on these that I haven't actually made public yet. But one of the 2 people that I haven't yet put on the web, I've been doing co-interviewing with an interviewer who's and then he and I. And so he and I have been doing like a master class of, let's take apart what happened in this interview, and why you said this, and what do you think she meant when she said that, and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think that's for somebody who's seriously interested in finding out about inner experience, I think that might be a very useful thing. We'll see, because I have written quite a few books now about how to do this, and quite a few papers about how to do it. But it's one thing to talk in the abstract about how to do it, and it's quite another thing to say, well, this is what happened. Everybody has seen what happened. Everybody was there. We'll show this video, and let's talk about that particular moment where everybody's been immersed in it.
Yeah, right.
Sort of like a master class. I'm a serious classical guitarist, and I attend guitar master classes or whatever, and that's the sort of the way those things work. For professional musician master classes, the world-class musician comes in and a student plays, and then the virtuoso and the student have a conversation about what happened.
Yeah, right.
And I think those are informative conversations in many ways, different from well, you know what I think about retrospection and generalization in general, and that's a lot of what those things are about. But they do give you some insight into what the skilled musician is listening to.
Yeah. So, but it sounds like you're more focused now on teaching other people how to do it rather than collecting the data and analyzing it yourself?
I think that's true, but I don't think that's anything new for me. I think I've always been like that.
Right.
I've always been of the teach somebody how to fish rather than fish.
Yeah. Do you have you in the past, because you've been doing this for years, right? You've been doing these
50-ish, 40-ish, 50.
How often are you surprised by what you hear in an interview with someone these days?
Well, that depends on how you define surprise, but pretty often
Oh, really?
Yeah, it depends on how you define surprise. I'm no longer dramatically surprised, I suppose, because I've seen quite a few stuff, and so most everything I've seen, something more or less similar to it. But I think I'm remarkably not good at predicting what I'm going to hear, and so in that respect, I'm always surprised.
You haven't revised your categories of inner experience, though?
I haven't revised my categories for a long time. I think those categories have held up pretty well. I worry about the categories because I think people tend to, once they have categories, tend to categorize. And I think that's probably not a healthy thing for humans to do most of the time, because I think most inner experience really falls between the categories. Every now and then you see an absolutely perfect textbook example of inner speaking, and every now and then you see an absolutely perfect textbook example of unsymbolized thinking, but much of the time things are sort of murky.
Just going to mute myself while I blow my very blocked nose. 1 minute.
Well, shall we look at beeps and see what we got?
Let's get into it. Yeah. Number one. So I was typing a text message on my computer, and what I've written is thinking the words. Thinking is a vague word, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
But I think, yeah. So there's quite a few there's a couple of these that are beeped me mid composing a text message. So it's yesterday afternoon and I was in bed, mostly, sort of trying to do some work on my computer and mostly just texting with people because that was all my addled, sick brain could manage.
Right.
Do I hear the words or do I just experience? I think I hear the words. I think I hear the words in my voice. I think I hear my voice producing the words. And then the other note that I have for this beep is feeling my very blocked nose and my sore lower back. So I've been very aware, and this is kind of a feature of all of these beeps, of being extremely congested, which has been, I've been unable to breathe through my nose, and I've found my attention and thoughts quite focused, or not focused, but very aware of that at all, when I've been writing the beeps, I've been aware that I've been aware of that.
And so were you aware of this at the moment of the beep? You're talking about chest congestion and nasal congestion or whatever. So
yeah, the notes that I've written is feeling my very blocked nose and sore lower back. So yeah, feeling them.
And the question that I'm asking here is that feeling them at the moment of the beep? So I'm understanding that your nose is blocked, then your back is sore or whatever, but it doesn't necessarily mean that at any particular moment that you're feeling that stuff. The question is, at the moment of the beep, were you feeling that, or was that a characteristic of the world? My nose is blocked.
No, I think I've found it to be very like my attention has been on it.
Okay. So I'm not trying to talk you out of it. I just want to make sure that we understand what we're saying here.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it's almost like if there's a sound that goes with the feeling of being aware of my unpleasant physical, nasal state. It's a lot of that. Like, I think I'm just feeling a lot of
And so are you using that as a metaphor that I feel that if I were going to put it into words or sounds that I'd go but or are you actually in some literal way emitting an something at the moment of the beep?
Look, I think I'm not emitting that at the moment of the beep, but definitely it's a sound that I've made both physically in a real way and an internal way many times over the past few days. Just a lot of
So I can empathize with that sound. That's not a foreign sound or feeling or whatever to me. But the question that I'm interested, one of the questions that I'm interested in, maybe a primary one, is that part of your direct experience at the moment of the beep?
The sound. No, look, not at the moment of this beep.
Okay.
No, but the feeling of the congestion and the sore back is in my, in my consciousness at the moment of the beep.
Okay. And so what does that feel like?
Well, I think it's just, I'm feeling these physical sensations, and I'm really, like I'm paying attention to them. Like they're very much in my, whereas I think before we've talked about, well, what is my physical setting for many of the beeps? And I've sort of said, oh, well, I've never, I'm very rarely thinking about what's around me and how I'm feeling. This has been very front of mind in all of the beeps, these physical sensations in my kind of face and chest that have just been very intrusive in a way that my physical state rarely is when I'm not sick.
Okay. So at one point, I think you described this as nose blocked, in which case might seem like I'm focusing on my nose. And in another, like this last time, you just said it was like my head and chest and nose, and in which case I'm focused on...
It feels like I'm focused on the whole part of me from behind my nose. It's a very, I feel like I can locate it because it's sort of like, it just feels like everything behind from my nose to here is full of snot, and it's almost like, I'm not saying this because I don't have a visual, but there's just a feeling of that whole area behind being completely blocked off or stuffed up.
And I feel that. I'm not inferring that. I'm experiencing blocked up snottiness in here, sort of in the core of my head and neck or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so it's not like I feel it on my cheek surfaces. Like sometimes the sinus thing is here, but in this particular beep, it's not that.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it's not surface. It's not like a scratch or a surface level sinus thing. It's very in.
Okay. And it goes down into here, but not throughout your chest. Is that right?
Nope.
Okay.
Although I did also write, because yesterday I was feeling very sore around my lower back. I think it was like from having coughed a lot, that I was like my sort of abdomen, and I was, when you've got like a low level ongoing ache, you can't ignore it. It's there. It won't leave your consciousness.
Well, I would say let's set that aside. Maybe it does and maybe it doesn't. Because I've sampled with quite a few people who have what they would call chronic pain, and I'm always in pain, and yet at many beeps they're not.
Yeah, right.
And it's what's tricky about pain in particular, and achiness maybe even most, is that it seems like it's there all the time. And a characteristic of it is that it's there all the time. And certainly whenever I notice it, it's there. And so like when the refrigerator light's on, it seems like the refrigerator light's on all the time. Because every time I see it, it's on. But that doesn't mean that in my experience I feel lower back pain all the time. And so the question is, at this particular beep.
Well, at this particular, I've written it there, so I feel like at this particular beep I was feeling it.
That sounds like I can't remember for sure directly, but I've written it down and therefore it must be true. Is that how that translates?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's been a while since we've sampled, and I have not gone back and looked at the beeps that we have had since the last time we sampled, which is a month or so, or maybe longer than that ago. and I was going to make a point about that, but I don't actually remember what it was now. The what I guess what I would say is that it sounds sort of familiar to me when as in this moment you're saying, well, I can't remember, but since I wrote it down, it must be true. I would say that most of the people that I sample with claim to be able to remember things. And
Do you believe them?
I do, actually, because of the way the procedure works. So we're you know, and I may be wrong about this, but and some of the people that I work with may be wrong with it. But the procedure, as a general rule, narrows down so that we only have to remember a small thing. And we're going to pay attention to it right after it happens and take down some notes about it. So we're going to specify. We're going to make specific this particular. We're going to specify this particular moment. And then most people say, well, I can remember what it is, and I wrote down some notes about that. And sometimes the notes contradict what they wrote down, but.
So what do you believe then? Wait, you're saying sometimes the notes contradict their memory?
Right.
And so you believe their memory over the notes?
No. That poses a problem for me. And so I accept that I believe that memory is always reconstructive. Mm-hmm. So every time it seems like I remember something, I'm really making it up from scratch now. I think that's the way memory works. Mm-hmm. But I also think that there are sort of different gradations about that. There are some things that are more constrained to events that happened and some things that are less constrained. And so some memory is more tightly memorized, I guess you would say, tightly recalled, and some is less tightly recalled. And I think I'm pretty consistent in saying, well, I want us to do the best we can to stay constrained to the moment of the beep, and I want you to do it the best way that you can do it. And I'm willing to agree that there's individual differences there. So you might be able to do it this way, and somebody else might be able to do it the other way. And I don't prefer one to the other because I think people are people are different from each other. But I guess what I would say is that there are some people who say, as you have a couple of times here, well, what I wrote down is this. And when people say that, it seems like what they mean by that is, I can't actually remember what happened. But what I wrote down was this.
Yeah, I mean, that's, but I trust because I personally trust my notes more than I trust my memory. And it's funny that you say most people don't have a hard time remembering because it's such a specific moment, but it's a tiny moment, and it's, there's often, and as I said, sort of when I'm doing it, I'm at home, there's often lots going on, and it's a completely inconsequential moment. So to, bank on, there's no, other than the fact that there's a beat, there's nothing else that distinguishes that moment from, the moments that came before it or after it, in that I'm at home doing a pretty mundane thing. So, is the beep enough to cement it, to isolate it in my memory? No, I don't think so. I think the note is what cements it in my memory.
So I think if we went back and looked at the transcripts, that we had a conversation about this once, or maybe more than once before, and Alec was a part of that conversation, and Alec I think in my recollection, I asked Alec, well, you sampled a year ago. Can you remember some of the beeps? And she rattled off a few beeps, I think. These are the samples that I had. So she would say, I can remember those things. And when she sampled, she would say, there's no question about it. For me, I think...
but even now I can remember some beeps from our, sessions that were months ago. I can remember the one where I was writing the XAN, Xanthi. I can remember that one. I can remember... But can I remember the beep, or can I remember our conversation about the beep? I mean, I would say I think what I remember is our conversation about the beep primarily, and that conversation sort of conjures a memory about the moment, but that may be reconstructed from the conversation.
So I would translate that into saying, well, I have a memory. I have a memory of the XAN writing, but I'm not sure whether that memory is of the thing. So it's not like I don't have memory. It's that I don't know exactly what that memory is of.
Yeah. Well, I remember where I was sitting, and I can visualize where I was sitting, and I can sort of conjure the memory of that one. And if I went and looked back in the notes, I probably could recreate the memory of others.
So the thing that is of vital importance to me and of interest to me, I guess I would say, is there are those people who say, more or less like you have said, frequently throughout their sampling, well, this is what I wrote down, and then there are other people like I've characterized Alec who would say, well, it doesn't matter what I wrote down. This is what I did. I can look at what I wrote down, but I can remember. So the question, are those people's experience different? That's really what's at stake here. And
are their experience different, or is their level of confidence just different?
Exactly. So that is what is at stake. And I think I'm as skeptical as they come. I'm a skeptical guy, so I want to keep these issues alive, front and center for me all the time. So I have come to believe, after 50 years, that it's likely that the experience is different. That the experience of
But when you say the experience is different, do you mean the experience of remembering, or the experience of...
The experience at the moment of the beep is what I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the other thing, reflecting on now, having done this a bunch of times, is something that I found regularly was... I think I've described it before in our sessions as feeling ambushed by the beep, but really having to stop and think, what was I thinking just now? And often the way I would access that was what was I doing? And then,
So I think all of that is tied up in your way of experiencing. And so it could be that it's your auditory system that is different from Alec's. And I don't want to. I want to personalize this, but not to make too much of it. But it's easier to say, Olivia does this, Alec does that, and it may or may not be true. But it could be that Olivia has an auditory system that doesn't process the beep clearly, and so has the beep come sort of gradually into awareness. Whereas Alec has an auditory system where the beep happens, and she knows exactly when the beep is. And that could result in Alec would know exactly what the experience was, and Olivia wouldn't, because for Olivia, we're talking about a time. And I'm sure that's true for some people, actually. I'm sure is too strong, but I'm pretty sure I've sampled with some people whose auditory processing is very different from the average guy's auditory processing.
I think that's really interesting because I am the kind of person that is unable to tune out sounds, right? So I find it very different to try and work or read in a situation where there is sound around me that is classical music I can do, but if there's a conversation happening here or music with words, I find it very hard to tune out. So, and I wonder if this, in a way that, so I notice my partner, for example, is someone who can sit there and read a book with all kinds of chaos going on around him, who can, theoretically, or who can, according to him, not hear when someone's talking to him if he's engrossed in something in a way that I can never not hear. Even if I'm extremely engrossed in something, I can always hear when someone says something or asks me a question or asks a question, which is obviously the same system. It's not the same. But anyway, so I guess I'm just surprised to consider that, or maybe it's not surprising considering that, but that, because in some ways, when I hear you say that your auditory processing system doesn't sort of, processes the beep perhaps more slowly, less immediately, it doesn't, it seems to be opposite to what I think of generally about my auditory processing system, where I'm quite sensitive to and to sounds and responsive to sounds.
So I think that's quite possible. So I didn't mean to be saying this is the way Olivia's system is. I was trying to say this is how one could end up with different ways of responding to the beep, different ways of being in the interviews with me. I wasn't trying to say that was it for you. So what you have just said is more in line with, I think there are some people who make very clear experiential figures, and everything else is really a long way back in the ground, like maybe your partner, as you're talking about. So he's into one thing at a time, and that one thing is it. And the rest of the world doesn't exist as far as he's concerned. I'm sure there are people like that. And I think there are other people whose experiential field, whatever that is more diffuse. And so the boundaries between what's central and what's not is gray rather than there and not there, which is the way it is for some people.
Yeah.
So I would say many people, they're when the beep goes off, they're just 100% clear about what's happening. There's just no, It was this and it wasn't that.
Yeah.
And you can try to talk them into it and twist their arm, or you can do whatever it is that, and those guys, you're not going to. And then there are other people that's just not true. And I think that is, I think the philosophers as a group would like to say, well, that's a characteristic of the language, and people are, people use words in a different way or whatever. I think that's not true. I think it's the experiential substrate, and then maybe they learn to use words differently because their experience is different.
Yeah. Yeah, which would, to further illustrate the differences, because I feel like just comparing myself and my partner, the way you described, his experience is that and that's it, and the rest of the world might not exist. And another way that I find this manifests is that, so I'm the kind of person that, if I'm coming down into the kitchen to both make a cup of tea and put the dinner on, or I'm just like, okay, well, I'll put the water on to boil while I do this, and and it's all about getting everything going, at the same time and maybe you'd just call it impatience as well, but it's like minimizing the waiting, because if I start the water before I go to the bathroom, then it's heating while I'm in the bathroom, and then I come back and it's already almost boiled. and then I'll make the tea while I'm, whereas I would say my partner will come downstairs and go, all right, well, I need to go to the bathroom. I'm going to do that first, and then I'm going to make the tea. I'm going to put this on, and everything happens quite sequentially, whereas I find I'm actually trying to do about 7 different things at once.
And I'm not wishing to say whether that's accurate or inaccurate about your partner or about you, but I think there are people who are like that, and I think that reflects their inner experience. I don't think it's just external behavior that's different. I think. But
and I'm sort of paying attention equally to all the different things that are happening.
Right, and I am not. I'm pretty sure, actually, that it's not wise to say one of those things is better than the other. I think.
No, I think each has their own advantages.
And ways that can get you into trouble.
Yeah.
So I'm not making a value judgment. This is really what I'm saying. I think inner experience takes place. I'm sure that it depends on whether you use an earphone or whether you use a retrospective device or whatever. And I think there are great, huge individual differences. And I think for some people it's vitally important. For others it might not make much difference. But like the Fran story that I think I've told you about, coming to terms with her inner experience was a miraculous thing for her. And for others it might not be. But so I'd say we should go on to beep number 2 here.
Yep, let's do. So look, beep number 2, which happened only a few minutes later, I was kind of oh God, sorry, my mother is just calling me in on many different platforms. Let me just quickly send her a text back to say I'll call her back. So about this. Can I call you in 30 minutes? Okay. So it was very similar. I was sort of engaging in the same text conversation. So I was in the middle of composing a text. I've written the same as above, hearing myself say the word novid, because I was telling someone I've been in bed for 3 days with novid, not COVID, novid. A lot of colds going around, people are talking about novid. That's it.
So hearing myself say the word novid.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what do you mean by hearing myself say?
Well,
let me ask a simpler question. At the moment of this beep, are you confident that the word novid was somehow in your inner experience?
Yeah, because at the moment of the beep, I was typing that word. And so, it feels like when I'm typing, when I'm writing text, that it's coming from within me to without me.
So I'm accepting that, but I don't need the explanation. I'm a descriptive guy, not an explanatory guy. And so the question is the word novid present to you at the moment of the beep?
Yes.
Okay. And then what you said about that was, I hear myself speaking that word.
Yeah.
And which is not to say I hear the word, and it's not to say I spoke the word.
And it's not to say I think the word, which is what I said in the first beep, isn't it?
Mm.
But none of those words, think, speak, hear, sensed is probably the better word.
So it's the word novid. Is that true?
Well, at the moment of the beep.
That's the moment that we're talking about.
Yeah.
At the moment of the beep, the word novid is here, not the concept novid, not the concept.
Yeah, the word. Definitely the word.
Okay.
The word.
All right. And of that we sound totally confident.
Yeah,
Like
I do feel confident about that, and I think because I am like I do like I like words. I'm a words person.
Mm-hmm.
I studied linguistics, in my undergraduate degree. Like I am interested in and pay attention to words, and
So
I just feel like words and letters are a present.
I totally accept all of that, but it's not what my interests are particularly, and my interest is that word present to you at the moment of the beat, and
Yeah.
I'm hearing you say yes with confidence.
Yeah, and the reason that I am confident that the word is present as opposed to the concept or idea of it is that I am typing the word. So I am focused on the word. I mean,
So
yeah.
so that's an explanation which I am going to discount, because I think skilled typists can type without having any words involved at all. You can. There are, whether
Yeah,
you can
and,
or not.
and in some, but I think the text message exchange, that kind of
So
typing.
so maybe so. I'm not disagreeing with you, and I'm not discounting your explanations. It's just that I want us to set those explanations aside and ask whether the word is present, not and experientially present, not theoretically present. Well, it must be present because I was typing, and I'm the kind of guy that when I type, the words are present. The question is whether this particular word, novid, was present on May 9th at 5:17 or whenever that beep happened.
Well, and then I think the other reason, I mean, look, honestly, Russell, I feel like, could be the word, could be the concept. I mean, I don't, like I feel quite sure it's the word. Obviously, the word is communicating a concept. I think there's a focus on the word because it's also, it's a novel, like, portmanteau construction that I think I was texting with someone. I've been texting people, I'm sick. Oh, is it COVID? And then I write back, no, it's Novid. I had a PCR. It's not COVID. So there's an element where I'm sending this, expecting them to understand it, aware that that they might think it's a typo, like focusing on a word much more than I would if I was writing dog or couch to someone, because I know that they're instantly going to understand that word.
So here's the deal. You're a linguist. You absolutely know the difference between the word novid and the concept novid. I think there's no doubt in your mind that what the difference between a word and a concept is. And yet, the question, was the word present to you or was the concept present to you, is difficult for you. And that is interesting. And it would, I'm working at trying to figure why that is, because so in my recollection of what's happened here, she started out fairly confident that the word was present, but now a few minutes later, now she's, well, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was just a concept, maybe it was, and
well, because.
And then she goes into because, which she can't seem to constrain herself, even though I've said I don't really care about the because. And I want to be abundantly clear. I'm not critical. This is not a Russ criticizing Olivia. I fully accept that Russ and Olivia are talking about something which is fundamentally important to the work that I've spent my career doing, and probably the work that you've spent your career doing. To say nothing of your inner experience in general and what inner experience means for you as you go about your everyday work. So we're talking about stuff that's important, it seems. what I would say is that many people, probably most people that I give beepers to, don't have this difficulty. Most of them would say the word was there or it wasn't there. And I could talk them out. I could say, well, Olivia says that sometimes the words and the concepts gets confused. Isn't that like you? And they say, well, fuck no.
Well, I'm not sure what this says about me, but it says something about me.
It is the kind of thing that I think it is what makes Olivia, part of what makes Olivia Olivia. It's the way she experiences things is different from the way Russ experiences things. And so Olivia has a personality that reflects the way she experiences things, and Russ has a way of a personality that reflects his way. And I want to be abundantly clear. I'm not saying Russ's way is better. I don't think that, and I don't think I have a right to know the answer to that question, actually. Thou shalt not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or whatever. And I think that's probably 100% true. So, was the word novid present at the moment of the beep? And it could be. So one way of trying to make sense out of our conversation is that at the beginning of our conversation, she was pretty clear about that, but then the conversation muddied the water. And so now she can't remember what was actually at the moment of the beep and what she said about the moment of the beep a little bit ago. And I, as a general rule, think that the more minutes I am into a conversation about a beep, the less I can be confident about what's going on. I think every question I ask muddies the water somewhat, and every answer you give muddies the water somewhat. And that's not a criticism of Olivia or of Russ. That's the way the world is.
Yep.
And so my method of trying to deal with that is what I call the iterative procedure. I want us to get, as a general rule, to get more efficient at describing what's in experience over the course of day after day after day of sampling, so that we can nail down what the experience was like before we get the water too muddied. But we haven't been too successful at that with you, possibly because it's been a long time in between sampling, and possibly because it's a characteristic of your experience, and those things are. And I don't want to leave myself as the innocent bystander here, possibly because I don't know how to ask the questions that help Olivia to describe her experience. I think that's, the whole thing is interesting from every aspect. But I don't think that makes it useless. I think it makes it interesting.
Yeah, I would agree. Are you going to ask me again, though, about Novid?
I think we've probably screwed that one up.
I think so. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
So there was a piece of classical music in my head. Oh, sorry, I've got to blow my nose again. Hold on, I'm going to mute myself here.
So without trying to explain why, just tell me what about this classical music in your head?
So there was and not a whole piece, but a phrase, a refrain of a piece of classical music. I can't, and it was amazing because I was trying to write it. I can't say what it was. I'm pretty sure it's on a playlist that we have, that when we put my daughter down to sleep, we have various classical music playlists. So, it's one of the, sound maybe a bit Mozart-y. I think I can remember which one it is now, but I'm not.
Okay, so let's not worry about that. So when you say it's in your head, do you mean I hear? Let's call it Mozart. Whether it was Mozart or not, let's call it Mozart. So yeah. I hear Mozart in my head,
and I hear instrumentation. So because sometimes I hear myself singing, but no, I'm hearing instrumentation
So
music.
I hear violins or cellos or whatever
Yeah.
whatever it is in my head.
Yeah.
It's not coming through the Alexa or whatever.
Through the baby monitor or the Alexa, no.
Okay. All right.
But that's where it came. I'm I'm also...
Let's not go there. So I hear this Mozarty thing in my head, and is there anything else in my experience at that particular moment?
Well, I've written that I was also paying attention to my breath because, it was stuffed up, as in congested.
Okay. And to my breath, to my breathing?
Yeah. To my breathing, my breath, my ability or lack of thereof to breathe.
And is this experience the same or different from, we had the first beep, I think, where we...
I would say similar, like just, aware of my breathing apparatus and situation in a way that I'm not usually. It was in my consciousness.
So on the first beep, we were pretty specific about where that was. It was a fairly narrow kind of a thing, and it wasn't so much as I understood it, so much about the breathing as about the congestion. But maybe that's the same thing, and we just didn't get that transmitted.
I mean, I think it's all the same. Just this general experience of feeling blocked, difficulty breathing, uncomfortable.
Okay.
Congested.
And does it make sense to ask which is more prominent to you at this particular moment, Mozart or the breathing? Does that question make sense?
Wait, sorry, say that again.
Which is more prominent in your experience? If this question makes sense, and maybe it doesn't, the hearing of Mozart or the attending to my breathing difficulty?
The music, definitely.
60-40, 90-10?
Yeah, let's go with 60-40.
Okay. And I don't
70-30 even?
Okay. So fairly substantially, but not horribly dominantly. I don't really care about the numbers. I just, more than could be 51-49 and it could be 99-1, and those are experientially very different kinds of things. So 70-30 is pretty substantially more music-y than mucusy. Music, but not mucus kind of a thing. So, and are you confident about the fact that at the moment of this particular beep, I was hearing this song, this piece?
Yeah, but why are you asking me that? Because when you ask me that, you like the question, I think, inspires a lack of confidence.
Sorry about that. My doorbell.
That's all right. Because I think the more you ask me, they go, well, was I?
So I am trying to understand what your inner experience is like. I think that's the bottom line. And what I take us to have said along the line here today is that, well, maybe it's clear, maybe it's not, maybe it's sort of fuzzy experientially or whatever. But this particular beep, it sounded like I was pretty clear. This was this song at this particular time. I can't remember what it was, but at the time I knew what I was hearing it. That's what I understood you to be saying. And what I would like to know, I guess, is there an experiential difference between this beep and some other beep where you weren't quite so confident?
This might not answer the question, but you know what I did when this beep happened, and I was writing down the notes, and I wanted to be able to write down what the piece of music was. So that Shazam app on the phone that can tell you. So I got out the app and tried to sing the piece of music into the Shazam, but of course it couldn't find it because, amazingly, despite the fact that I could hear it with great clarity in my head. I could not reproduce it, or maybe that's not amazing, but obviously there's a fair amount of skill required in singing an in-tune melody. Anyway, so I couldn't, but I'm quite sure.
Well, that story would make it seem that within seconds after this sample, you were confident that there was a song going on, a piece going on, confident enough that you thought that you could sing it enough that Shazam could recognize it. That's the kind of thing that I take as good evidence as there could possibly be that there was some kind of experience going on, and it's not Russ that has screwed this up. I mean, Olivia believes, apparently, at that particular moment, that it was going on, and that she could try to hum it to Shazam, and she wasn't successful to that, which I'm not either when I try to do that. But that doesn't matter as far as I'm concerned. As far as whether Olivia was hearing music, it's hard for me to imagine what it would be like for Olivia to have a beep and then say, "Well, I'm going to hum that to Shazam," when there wasn't something in your experience at the moment. I mean, that's bizarre.
I feel like it's good evidence that's what was going on.
So that inspires me to think that Olivia, at least some of the time, knows what's in her experience. And then that inspired me to ask, well, would Olivia see this as different from some other times, or is it sort of the same thing, but this one is somehow easier to capture because the Shazam was present or whatever?
Well, because music is its own kind of language, right? In a way that words versus concepts, it's a blurry line.
The disadvantage of being smart is that it's easy to you have the ability to make up stories that go in all different directions, and the
I think it's a good theory. My theory I just came up with. I mean,
and it might very well be true, and probably like most theories, it's 10% true. You got a theory that's 10% true, you're doing really well. But so what I've got out of this is at least sometimes Olivia knows what's in her experience long enough to hum it into Shazam anyway. And maybe it's because it's music, and maybe it's because it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon as opposed to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and maybe it was because the sun had just come out, or maybe it was for a lot of other reasons, which I think are.
So I think my reflection on this whole experience of doing and obviously I read a lot about this process before I did it with you. And so in some ways was and continue to do it on myself, even when I'm not wearing the beeper, in that, there are times when what is in my inner experience is very definitive or well-defined, in that it's, I catch myself rehearsing a conversation I'm about to have with somebody, or, thinking in really specified ways sometimes. I often find music in my head, just realize that there's a bit of music on repeat in my head. Sometimes I know where it's come from, sometimes I don't. But a lot of the time, there's also just kind of nothing so clearly specific. A lot of the time, I guess there's external input in the form of text or conversation. But sometimes, if someone said, "What are you thinking right now?" I'd be like, "Oh, it's kind of, couldn't say for sure. Oh, I was thinking I want to have, a cheese sandwich for lunch." No,
Well, I think what you have just said for the last minute is a pretty good characteristic of what we have found in the beeps. That sometimes the beeps are pretty clear. My own experience was pretty clear, and I heard Mozart or whatever. And sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
And what I would say, having been around the block a few times in this regard, is that there are a lot of people who are always clear. They would never have a beep where they didn't know what was going on. And there are other people who are never clear. And there are other people who have multiple things going on simultaneously and can tell you about what they are. And other people have a mess, experientially. And I'm what I think is that it's worthwhile exploring it. And I think science, psychological science in general, has short-circuited itself or short-sighted itself by not trying. So should we go on to beep number 4?
Yes, but let me just ask you one more question. Don't you think, the whole CBT is kind of that, isn't it? It's getting people to identify thoughts and then speak to themselves about those thoughts, right? Like the whole, my understanding of CBT is, like being aware of a thought that you're having that could be in language or could be in concepts, but is something that is happening in your head and then responding to that, right?
Well, I think that is the philosophy behind CBT, and I think that they're hugely mistaken in the sense that I believe that most or many or influential CBTers think that there is a well-defined thought of the kind that they say that you're supposed to be able to discover, which I think is probably not true. And then they train you to think in such a way that is going to change your existence, and they don't do what I think is anywhere near a good enough job to ascertain whether some new kind of thinking actually does take place. So I would say I'm not on the CBT bandwagon. I think CBT might be more effective if they knew what a thought was in the first place. And there are some people who think in words, and most CBTers that I know of believe that all thinking is in words. And and then they teach people to change the words that they use. And I think that's mistaken on the way in and mistaken on the way out.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that it's not useful. It's quite likely in certain situations that engaging in CBT, even though you're not doing what you think you're doing something that's useful to somebody. Doesn't probably have anything to do with whether they were talking to themselves, but we can enter into a contract where we can jointly assume that I was talking about this and you were talking about that, and then you're going to change the way I talk about this and you talk about that, and it doesn't happen to be true, but we might feel better at the end of it. But what I think, rightly or wrongly, is that if psychological science knew what was really going on in inner experience, and then they might have something better, more efficient, more useful, more whatever than CBT. And so CBT is useful for 25% of the people, or whatever that number is. Maybe it's 40% or whatever. Well, why doesn't it work for those other folks? And I don't think that the CBT folks have a way of answering that question, because you got to do something like what I do, I think, to answer that kind of a question.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're probably right.
And it could very well be that the kind of thing that I would do won't answer that question either. I'm totally on board with that. I think that's quite possible. What I'm quite sure of is that we don't know the answer to that, because there aren't very many people out there. So we've been at this for an hour here. Are we gonna get to the rest of the beeps, or are we gonna say that this was? I'm happy.
Should we do one more beep? Okay. Why don't we do one more beep, and then
right.
I may need to go and actually drink some tea and lie down.
Number 4.
So this is number 4. This is number 4, the next one. So I was alone in the kitchen chopping carrots, and the radio was on. Here's what I've written: chopping carrots, paying attention to the action and the sound of the chopping, as well as the voice on the radio. And you know what's interesting, and returning to our conversation about the memory of it, obviously the beep goes off and I quickly, think about the words that I've just heard literally in that moment, in those fractions of seconds before the beep. And I really thought, I didn't write them down this time, and I actually can't even remember what they were talking about. I assume it was politics, because we're in the run-up to a federal election. I think I would have thought that I would have remembered it, but I haven't. Yeah.
So how about the chopping of the carrots? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think I do.
Okay. So what I have come to think about that is, tell me about the chopping of the carrots. So you said it was both the sound and the action. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So tell me, what do you remember?
Well, I think I remember paying attention to the chopping. In a way, I think a lot of the mundane, daily, tasky kind of things.
So let's try to set that aside and get back to this particular
chopping.
chopping.
Well, look, so I was definitely paying attention to sort of the action, the movement, how I was cutting, and also the sound of the the knife through and the sort of click at the end.
And by the action of the cutting, do you mean your hand and arm action?
Yeah, my hand and arm action and the movement of the knife.
Both?
Yeah.
So it would be possible for somebody to be interested, for whatever reason, to the action of the knife going through the carrot. I'm just paying attention to the blade of the knife going through the carrot. Or somebody else could be, I'm noticing how my body is pushing this knife, and I can.
Yeah, but I think it's both, and it's more my movement and the movement of the knife, and not like it doesn't resound to hear you say thinking about the blade passing through the carrot.
So it's the movement of the chopping. It's the Olivia chopping rather than the knife cutting. Is that right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then at the same time I hear something. What do I hear?
Yeah, I mean, I'm listening to the radio. I'm paying attention to the radio. I'm hearing words. Um,
So I was more interested in the chopping. So you had the sound of the chopping.
oh, yeah, I'm hearing the kind of regular, steady, you know, unmistakable sound of chopping. And
And
probably appreciating it. There's an element of appreciating that sound, enjoying that sound.
and by rhythmic you mean it's not like I hear this chop and then this chop and then this other chop. It's that I hear a circular or repetitive chop, 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 chop. Is that what you mean?
Well, I don't know if circular or repetitive is
All right, then.
part of the. It's just being aware that every time I chop, there's a sound, and that sound is the chopping of carrots sound, which is, and I think a nice sound. Um,
Okay. But so I'm what I'm gathering is that this is a sound that's sort of extended in time. It's not like I'm hearing one particular chop. I'm hearing a repeated.
well, it's true because I mean, obviously, at the moment of or in the moments before the beep, there would be one chop, but I've written down the chopping sound. So, I guess I've extrapolated a little bit to my experience of what I'm doing in that kind of minute around the beep. I was there, I had a bunch of carrots that I had peeled, and I was chopping, and I was listening to the radio. So and I was kind of in a state of focusing or of those things being in my experience for probably a whole minute, and the beep came within that minute. I mean, maybe it wasn't a minute. Maybe it was. How long I was chopping for? I don't know.
So experience is a wonderful thing, I guess I would say. And I'm when I say I'm interested in experiences at a moment, I don't mean to say I'm interested in a momentary experience. What I mean is experience that is caught in flight at a particular moment. So I want to be precise about the moment, but that doesn't mean that the experience is short. So the fact of the rhythm of chopping, the rhythm of chopping, the repetitiveness of the chop, chop, chopping, that is extended in time, maybe for a minute. I've been listening to that for quite some time. I think that's possible. But and so at the moment it would not be fair. So I'm gathering what you're saying. It would not be. It would not do justice to my experience to say, I heard a chop. What my experience was of a repetitiveness of chops, a series of chops.
Yeah.
And that's obviously extended back in time before the beep or whatever. But my experience, which was caught in flight at the moment of the beep, was this series of chop sounds.
Yeah.
And so that I think is, I think that's one of the ways that experience works. Experience isn't one chop and then another chop and then another chop. Because if you go there, you could say, well, there's the first half of the chop and then there's the second half of the chop and then there's the first half of the first half and the second half of the second half and whatever. So you can never stop that. But that's not the way experience works. Your experience makes some kind of sense out of things in the sense that it happened to be making, in this case, seems. I'm hearing the pleasant rhythmic chop, chop, chop of carrots that seemed somehow in sync with my chopping motion.
Yeah.
And then that I seem to be able to remember, but I have a trouble remembering what's going on the radio. And so now Russ wants to know why that is, and he's pretty sure he's not going to find out. And so that's why, in general, he does this kind of thing frequently. But what I would say, overall, I haven't done it in a long time, is that it takes people generally a while to become comfortable with the fact that their experience might be dominantly of the sensory awareness kind, like the chop, chop, chop thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's right. And I would say that that'd be, that the radio was on, I was listening to it, but I was not, the focus of my attention was probably the carrots, the chopping, the sound. Yeah, I feel like you can be listening to something, you can be hearing something and not listening to it, which was what I was doing, I would say. Or half listening.
And yeah, I agree with that. So I would say many of your beeps today were of the sensory variety. Some because
Yep.
you were sick, maybe because you were sick. You could say it was because I was sick, and so I was paying attention to the sensations. But it might also be because Olivia actually has a lot of sensory awareness, and she happens to be sick, and so her sensory apparatus was aimed at prominent sensory things, which was nose stuffiness.
Yeah.
But there's also music stuff and other kinds of things. And so I will say some people, and I'm not saying that this is a characteristic of you, because if I had to bet, I'd probably bet against it. But for some people, when they sample with me, and about the third day, they start to recognize that they have the sensory awareness stuff. And when they do that, it's like then after that, everything is clear. Well, I was sensing this, and I was sensing that, and I was sensing this. And I'm always sensing that. I'm obviously processing the rest of the world, but it's not directly in my experience, because what's in my experience, what my consciousness finds interesting is sounds and when people realize that about themselves, then they will say, well, now I'm pretty clear about what was going on at the beep. I was into this sensory aspect. And you could say, well, they just figured out that Russ wants to hear about sensory stuff. And once they did that, and I don't think that's really true, because Russ doesn't care about sensory stuff any more than he cares about a lot of other stuff. But that doesn't mean that, my participants might believe things about Russ that's not true, and it doesn't stop them from shaping their behavior according to their belief about what Russ wants. So the endeavor that we have been participating in, what this kind of interview, I think is difficult. I think it's complicated from a variety of different ways, a variety of different reasons. And one could say that Olivia approaches this exercise in a way that frequently involves explanatory flights of fancy or something like that. And I don't mean that in a negatory way at all. I'm commenting that an explanation is coming shortly, and there's advantages to that. But then the question becomes, well, so Olivia's experience might be just exactly like mine, or exactly like Alex, or exactly like anybody else's, but she, for whatever reason, likes to tell explanatory stories, and Alec doesn't. And so Alec doesn't give explanations, and Olivia does, but their experience is the same. That's a possibility.
Well, how will you ever know that?
Well, I don't know that we ever know that for sure, but what we have is people like me who takes that seriously on an individual basis. So it's not like I sit back and think about people, well, it could be this way and it could be that way. It's like, so I'm out there in the trenches with Olivia, and then I'm in the trenches with Alec, and I'm in the trenches with whomever else.
Yeah.
Trying to answer these questions, and trying to rid myself of the preconceptions of the answers to the questions, the best I can say after having done that is, I'm guessing it has something to do with Alec's experience is different from Olivia's experiences, and that
Yeah.
there's- and that's not to say that Alec is better or worse or whatever, because I firmly believe that thou shalt not eat from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. I don't think I know the knowledge of good and evil, and it's not given to me to know that. And
it strikes me that so the options could be, as you've kind of said, either everyone's experience is the same, but different people have different ways of accessing and expressing their experience,
that's possible.
or that everyone's experience is completely different. Yep.
What I would say is that I have seen enough people in enough different situations that are enough different that I don't think it's the case that people's experience is the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. It seems like the latter is the better explanation.
I also think it's difficult. You know, we've spent a fair number of hours together, and we're both pretty smart people, and we've applied ourselves to this task, and we haven't loosened the Gordian knot of it entirely, and so it is difficult.
Do you think that 100 years into the future, there'll be some sort of technological solution that makes this sampling easier, more accurate, different?
So it's hard to bet against technology. I've been burned pretty badly on a few occasions for vastly under appreciating what was coming. And so I think the answer to that is probably yes. But I also think that the technology is more likely, in the term that I can imagine, let's put it that way, the technology is more likely to validate the kind of exercise that you and I are engaged in. So when I say something like people's inner experience are different, I think the technology is going to be able to come and say, well, Russ was right or Russ was wrong.
Yeah.
And I of course think that Russ is right, and so I think the technology is going to be able to show what I really think about Russ is that he's partially right and partially wrong. And you know, whether it's 50-50 or 90-10 or whatever, 10-90, I don't know, but I think the technology is going to be able to validate the portion of Russ that's right and invalidate the portion of Russ that's wrong, which doesn't make Russ inconsequential. It makes him more consequential, but it can also maybe establish of all these people who claim to be doing DES or whatever, which of them are actually good at it. The technology might be able to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And it could also be that the technology would come to recognize that the technology can't answer the question, and so we humans are left to try to figure it out. I don't know. Or we'll just blow ourselves off the planet and then
I mean, that's probably more likely.
Some other
beforehand,
civilization will have
yeah.
to start the same thing, and when they get to this, when they get close to this portion of the problem, then they're solving the problem, then they'll blow themselves up. So are we going to do this again, or we think we've done this enough?
Look, I actually find it quite enjoyable, so I'm happy to do it again. I mean, how many times do you like to do it with people?
I would say it depends. I've done it as few as 3 maybe, or less if people drop out or whatever, and as many as 50 maybe.
Oh, wow.
And it's pretty heroic to do
Well,
with 50
seeing
people.
as we're close to the as few as, having only done it 4 times, I mean, sure, let's do it again.
All right.